I would like to welcome all of you here this morning to our final meeting of the Star Hill Midwinter Conference. I don't know about you, but I've had a wonderful weekend, and I hope you have too. I'm like Brian. I've been up here many times and didn't know what to say about the speaker because I was afraid if I said anything I'd be telling a lie. Can you hear me now? But this man this morning, my only problem with introducing him is that instead of having too few words, I got too many words. And Dave told me many years ago that my function up here, if I was ever asked to chair, was to introduce the speaker, sit down, and shut up. If they wanted me to talk, they'd ask me, but I'm going to say a few things this morning because this man and his wife have meant so much to me in my sobriety. I met them when I was here probably about 2 years for the first time. And at this point in my life, I had stayed sober purely on the fellowship. And I know that now. I didn't know it then. And as God has done so many times in my AA life, He put the right people in the right place at the right time. And these people and another lady that was with them were the right people. And all I heard that weekend down at a little retreat down at Camp Monroe was big book steps, big book steps. And it somehow penetrated my fog that this was what I needed, was the steps and the big book. Now, I'd read the big book, but I'd never studied the big book. And they told me it was a text. It was something to use. I have not been in direct contact with these people for the last few years, but I have never failed when anybody's been to Texas, and I don't say, did you see Marcia and Bob, and how are they doing, and what are they doing? And I've gotten always such wonderful reports about what they're doing in their lives. And I love this couple and this man very much this morning, and I know you will too after you've heard him. And he's a delightful person. He has a beautiful sense of humor, and he is just, in my book, a beautiful person. Help me welcome Bob W. from Whitney, Texas.
Good morning. Well, seated up here a moment ago, or about 5 minutes ago, I observed in your faces while seated here about 5 minutes ago, I observed in most of your faces an attitude of love and compassion and an expectation about what you might hear from me this morning, and Dave screwed it up and made everybody that I can see mad. One person made so bold in Texas recently as to discuss smoking in an AA meeting, and I have never known what became of it. He has obviously just disappeared, but I do appreciate it. My name is Bob White, and I'm an alcoholic. And by God's grace, and because this program does work, and continues to work one day at a time in my life, I've not had a drink since August the 12th, 1954. And for this period of sobriety, this morning I am indeed grateful. You observe that we who are from Texas get to our dry date right off the bat. And you folks up here slip yours in quite slyly, but you never fail to give it. And I just wonder if there's some particular reason. Down where I come from, anytime a fella gets up and says, "My name is Joe, and I'm sober today," you hear someone say, "Uh-oh," and he rarely has been sober very long. But that's the tradition that I was brought up in, and I continue to do it. You know, we were talking last night in Dave's room, and just a handful of people about, someone said, "What are you going to talk about?" And I think I startled everyone, and I said, I will have no idea until I'm standing behind the podium about what I'm going to talk about, other than about myself and the direction that I'm going to take. And I really don't know what all it is that I'm going to say, but the direction I'm going to take, I'm going to talk about the power and the lack of power as it is given to us to understand in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I certainly hope that I don't get involved in anything that you can't reconcile in the big book. Let me see how I can start. I think maybe one thing I want to do first. You know that speaker that we had last night. Oh, God, I love him. We've been friends for so long. I heard something about that dude last night that I didn't know. And I related something about myself that he didn't know. He said that he was caught up for a period of time in a fantasy that had to do with being shot from an airplane, or his plane was shot down. And he was made a prisoner of Germany and escaped and got with the Russians, and it made one hell of a story. And it was a big lie. Now let me tell you a story. I was a first pilot of a B-24 in World War II. Oh-ho! Another one of those dum-dums. I was shot down over Germany and remained a prisoner of war for 15 or 16 months. I escaped and got with the Russians. Boy Scout honor. Mine's true. He couldn't believe that when I told him. Oh, let me tell you how I was brought up. Or raised up. I was raised in a family and caught up in an atmosphere that any reference made about the human anatomy, particularly that portion of it from your knees up to your neck, was always referred to as down there. My mother would say, "Take your hands out of your pocket. What are you doing down there? You go in there and take a bath and wash good down there. But don't you wash too long down there." And that ought to tell you all you'll ever need to know about my upbringing. I don't know whether I was a happy kid or I don't know exactly how much unhappiness that I experienced in adolescence, and I know I experienced a bunch of it as I got a little older. But I came from a crackerjack family, I really did, and there was quite a bit of love, usually in evidence in our family life. And I, like nearly every other speaker that you'll ever hear floating around in AA, always remember my childhood as being one that has to do with a state of unrest and dis-ease. I just never did quite get with it like I felt others were. I just didn't do it the same way, or it didn't work out the same way, or something of that nature. But I didn't have all that bad a childhood. I just seemed to be set apart just a little. In describing a little of my childhood, I want to tell you about the direction that I'd like for this morning to go. Early on in the big book, it tells us these words. It says, "The lack of power is our real dilemma." There was a time in my life I thought that everyone external to myself in all circumstances external to myself was my dilemma. I thought therein lies the problem. After I had been sober or dry in AA for quite some time, I thought that drinking whiskey was my real dilemma. And I found that that was not so. Drinking alcohol and the things that were created as a result of it were only a symptom of what my real problem was, and the lack of power was my dilemma. A number of pages on past this particular reference about power in the big book of AA, it says these words: further on, clear-cut directions will be given, and this has to do with the location of the power necessary for people like you and for me. And wonders to behold, a number of pages on past this reference are these words. It says, and now the power has been added. And that's the story of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous as I know it. I, like most other AAs that I have ever heard talk, I think the only people who didn't get sober when they were 16, to take their first drink when they were 16, are people who do not talk at conventions. I suspicion that among you, some of you had your first drink at 11 and 12, and some, hung in there pretty tight and didn't drink till you're 22 or 3. But all convention speakers start drinking when they were 16. Everyone I ever knew. So I, too, took my first drink when I was 16. Let me tell you about taking my first drink. I love to tell about my first drink. Marceline says she's bored with it. She's only heard it nearly 29 years. But I like to tell about it. The first drink that I ever took happened at the same time I had my very first date. When I was going up to 16, when I was 16, I was still playing marbles and digging caves and going barefooted in the summertime. And I was a boy, and I acted like a boy. And I really had wanted to have a date. I'd heard about dating. I had asked about dating, and I had observed people who did date. And I figured out that I wanted to do that too, but I did not know how to go about it. I used to go down to Doc Fanning's drugstore and sit and observe some of the local Jim dandies take their dates and go down and get a Coke. And I would watch the nonchalance, this air of worldliness. That's a little tiny town and it only had one drugstore. But some of these dudes could really lay it on. And they would drive up in their little cars and roll the window down, honk the horn, and A.B. Cole with a little white hat on would come running out and ask them what they wanted, and he'd bring a couple of Cokes on a tray. And this is as vivid in my memory as yesterday. How these dudes would loll back in the seat and drink their Coke and slide their arm up around the back of the girl. And I thought that was the slickest thing I'd ever seen. And I wanted to get with it, and I wanted to do it too. Well, a little time went by, and I still had not found the starting place about having a date. But I kept thinking about having a date. And I really thought a little beyond just dating. And sometimes I thought a whole lot about just what's over the hill from just dating. And I read an expression not too long ago, and it said, you might as well not itch unless you can find a place to scratch. And that was my dilemma at that particular time. I couldn't find anything to scratch. But anyway, one time a miraculous thing happened to me. I found myself with the loan of my older brother's Model A Ford Coupe and a $5 bill all at the same time. And that was big-time stuff. He had an older friend, a guy about 10 years older than I would have been at the time, who found that I had the loan of my brother's car and $5, and there was an instantaneous friendship developed between us. And he wanted to know if I would like to go out on a party with him that night, Saturday. And I said, by all means. And then started this questioning that just nearly ruined the whole show. He said, are you going steady now? And I said, not right now. And he said, well, what do you do? Just date one girl and another girl? And I said, that's it. But it seemed that there wasn't one available at that time. To shorten this story up, he got me a date with his girlfriend's older friend. And my very first date was with a girl that I presumed to be at least 25, 6 or 7 or 8, and quite large. And there are, I can tell just by the hair, who remembers Model A Fords, particularly Model A Ford Coupes. Honor bright, the seat isn't that wide. Anyway, I was scared to death. Now I want to tell you something about this power business. I know today why I was so terribly apprehensive, so ill at ease, is because I didn't have the power to be different than what I was. I had no means to be anything other than 16 years old, frightened, nervous, and apprehensive about having a date. I had no background to support me in any manner so that I could have been different. The lack of power was my real dilemma. Not the circumstances, but the lack of power. Anyway, arrangements were made and we got in the car. And boy, howdy, it was a tight fit. It was so tight that this other dude's girl had to sit in his lap. And, you know, I thought that was pretty keen. It just looked like a pretty smooth thing. This girl that I was supposed to be dating mashed right smack dab up against me, and it felt like molten lead running down my leg. I do believe her temperature was 135 degrees. Model A Fords have a gear shift right smack dab in the middle of the floor. When it's night and you're trying to shift gears, you just run into all kind of oddities. The most amazing thing of all is what I discovered when I turned right. I had never dreamed they'd be that soft. We had not gone 2 miles in that car until I was a nervous wreck. You see, I honestly didn't have the power to be any different than what I was. Everything that was said created an embarrassment for me. They said, well, let's go get a drink. And I went, and whizzed off down towards Doc Fanning's drugstore. They thought it was hilarious. They meant the bootlegger. And God, it just crushed me that I had driven to the wrong place. I didn't even know where they had a bootlegger. But we went to the bootlegger and got, I shall never forget, 2 pints of sloe gin with my money. Incidentally, after this particular evening, I found myself in the same financial condition as I was in nearly 25 years later when I had my last drink. Man, they flushed me out on the first one, and I just stayed that way all those years. They got this liquor. We drove out to the cemetery. That seemed to be, I did not know this at the time. I later practiced this thing, but it seemed like the cemetery was just a crackerjack place to go. And we drove out to the cemetery, and they snatched one of these 2-pint bottles out of the sack. Let's all have a drink. Those people insisted that I drink first. And there again, I don't ever remember a feeling or an attitude that I have where I was totally and completely defenseless as I had at that moment in time. I just didn't have the power to be any different than what I was. And I had no background that would support a change in what I was. You see, I didn't know whether each of us were to get 1 drink apiece out of this bottle, or each of us would take 12 drinks apiece out of the bottle. I really didn't know how to do it. And they insisted that I drink first, and after a little interval, I threw all caution to the wind. And this pattern was established at that one split second in time. Throw all caution to the wind with no apparent fear of recourse. And I took a big drink. I don't remember today at all about that drink. It just went down. The brief memory I have of it, it wasn't too bad, it wasn't too good, and it was a great big slug. And they drank, and in a little bit, they all wanted to drink again. And of course, I had had this previous experience in drinking. So when they said, you drank first, well, it was a little easier this time, and I took another big belt. And I do not remember whether it was the second, third, or fourth drink. But somewhere in that brief interval, I heard this voice. And it was a voice, one like I had always wanted to use. It was a voice that had no fear in it. It knew what it was doing. And it said, let's all have another drink. And it was me. And the power had been added. For the first time in my life, as I remember it, I felt whole. All of the things that I was apprehensive about seemed to fall away. And I was made whole. You know, we talk about the damnation and self-destruction of alcohol. But I do believe today that there are people who need it. And this brief interval of time that brings this blessed relief, it's like a spiritual experience. But you and I today know that it was not a spiritual experience. But it was the closest thing that I had experienced at that time. You see, the lack of power was my real dilemma. And I did not know how to gain the power to be different than what I was then, and most certainly what I would later become. I think that I'm no different than most of you. My early on drinking was controlled by my parents and the lack of money to buy liquor. You know, I was a great big boy in the middle of the Depression, and no one had money. But this I remember. I remember that I knew, and this was a real knowing, that any time I drank, something special was going to happen to me. And there was going to be a good feeling connected with it. And when I first started drinking, you know, the good feeling lasted a little while. And it seemed to be worth every experience that I later came to, regardless of how bad. You know, it appears to me that my alcoholism, and possibly yours, could be weighed on a set of scales. And when we first start drinking, it appears that the good that comes from the drinking outweighs the bad or harm as the result of it, that the scales are just like this. The good stuff just totally outweighs the bad stuff. And as time goes by, as we continue and possibly slip over that invisible line that separates social from pathological drinking, and it gets to be about right here. I want to tell you about a second line that I believe that some people in AA have passed. I know I did. I don't think the percentage of all AA members is very high that includes those who passed this second line. I don't know that it has a name, but it is an experience. It's when that just possibly you finally got to a state of being even. The fun, the joy, the inner security that it appears to bring drinking. That drinking appears to bring. And all the related things that go with it. It seems as if there's a power added that makes us appear whole. And then one day we take one more drink, and the scales go tink, and they will forever be there. Never again will they tap back. Not one time of all the thousands of people whom I know today in AA and have known in the past do I know of one human being who has brought the scales back. Once they pass the halfway mark, they're there forever. Now there's this second thing, and that's when we live in this existence for years and years and years. When the good continues to dribble away, this feeling of security and inner release that comes from drinking, the support system seems to shatter. The support system that alcohol brings. And there's nothing but more misery, more shame, more embarrassment, and more of the things that degrade us as a human being. This becomes our daily experience. There is a second line that some people in AA pass. Is when they're given the insight to recognize their real problem. Alcohol will surely kill me if I continue drinking. I must and I will do something about this condition that exists in my life. I'll quit drinking. And one finds they can't quit drinking. The chains that bind us are never felt until it's too late to break them. And that was my experience. I recognized approximately 2 years before I took my last drink the nature of my problem. My real problem or my dilemma was my lack of power. The nature of that particular problem as it exists in my life is that I was alcoholic. And slowly and surely I was going on a course to destruction, not only to myself but those about me. And I recognized this condition in my life and was absolutely powerless to do anything about it. I could not be anything different than what I had become. And the reason why was the lack of power in my life. I'll swear that I do believe that that 2-year period was it was hell. I suffered, and suffer is a good word. It is applicable in this case. I usually look askance at someone tells me, when someone tells me about their suffering. Hurt, I understand. But this is a suffering. It really is. It's an inner anguish. It is a soul sickness. It's a cancer of our very being when we recognize the nature of a problem and are powerless to do anything about it. I was told to have faith and everything would work out. I was told to pray and there would be results. Let me tell you the difference in Alcoholics Anonymous and religion as I understand it. And oh my goodness, don't any of you even suspicion that I'm not big on religion, because I am. But there really is a difference. It is a difference that saved my life, and I suspicion yours. They said, son, if you'll just have hope, it really will work out. If you will have faith, these things will come about in your life. And if you pray, there will be answers. And I said, how do you do it? I did not know. And they gave me their answers. Now listen to this. These answers work for them. So never should we criticize. Those answers represent a movement among peoples of all time that's been the grandest experience in the human experience. One of these is called Christianity. There are many of them. But did you know that was not, and it would not be, by experience that way? The difference in these two is subtle, but it does exist. When I came to you, no one said pray. No one said have faith. No one said have hope. They really did. And I do not tell people today to pray. I do not tell people to have faith or hope. I say, here are the things we did. And if you do them, then you will learn to pray. And your prayers will be answered. There are certain conditions that I had to fulfill. Before this, there didn't seem to be any particular conditions. I needed to do those things first, and then it would all work out. It's not the way AA does it. AA said, there are conditions that you have to fulfill if you want to be able to pray. And quite quickly, that's step 1 through step 9. And by George, it worked out exactly like they told me. By the time I had worked my way around to some of these steps. In fact, listen to this. I was amazed before I was halfway through. I am a living example of every promise that I can find in the Big Book being a daily experience, one or the other, a combination of many of them, or in some few instances, every one of them have been my daily experience since the conditions have become fulfilled. And you know, sometimes I think it's an injustice to new people in AA to tell them if they'll just come on in here and everything's going to work out. And then we wonder why we have so many slippers in our group. Personally, I think it is better said. Some rough sledding ahead. But boy, howdy, cowboy. It's a lot easier, our rough sledding, than your best times. Here are the things we did. And guess what? The very first one to talk about is, we admitted we were powerless. Way back there, you remember, in the early on pages of the Big Book, it says the lack of power was my dilemma. And then we gain an insight about what to do so that we recognize the power. Every trouble, every bad experience all sadness, all things of this nature that are recognizable by a review of my past. Not only my immediate past, but back to my first conscious memory up to this one moment in time. Every trouble I have ever experienced was immediately preceded by a decision based on self. I don't know about you, but there is not one exception to that in my life. Later in my drinking, I experienced a lot of trouble. For whatever my memory's worth, and, you can add to Mark Lane's, which is pretty good in some of these things, the last year or so that I drank enough to become unconscious every day. Every day of my life, I drank enough to become unconscious. And I could not understand why things were as they were in my life. But today, I know. You see, I didn't have the power to be anything different than what I'd become. I think one of the most hateful things that a poor old drunk hears is, hey, you don't have to be down there. Why don't you get up and straighten up? It's as if you think he might like being where he is. I don't know that there's an expression that I didn't hear about my condition, straighten up and be a man, all of those things, every one of them. And while they were saying those things, I was thinking to myself, my God Almighty, I hate being what I am. Why can't I be different? Why can't I be different? Why do I have to do the things that I do and then daily sit and look at tears flow from their eyes? And the one that I just, God Almighty, I couldn't stand it, was silence. Silence that was directed toward me. And they were hurt. They weren't putting on. Their hearts were breaking. They lived in despair. And really, it had a lot to do with my behavioral pattern. And I, like them, wanted me to be something different than what I'd become, but didn't have the power to do it. I had every suggestion made to me that I have ever heard by preachers, mothers, wives, kids, brothers, friends, all the gamut. They all wanted me to be something different than what I'd become. I even in some instances was totally willing, I felt that I was, to cooperate with them, but I couldn't be anything different than just exactly what I was because I didn't have the power to do it. I know today, beyond all knowing, that there really isn't any good people. There aren't any good people. There aren't any bad people. It's like Chuck C. says. They're just the people who know and those who don't know. But no good and no bad. Do you know what I know today? I know that I have available to me any time I want to plug in the power to be different than what I am right now. And each time I'm caught up in the company of people like you, there's an inspirational effect. And you know what you do for me? You make me want to be better than I am right now. And the result of me being here is that, since I know there is a power, is that you will have contributed to making me better than I am today. And I'm grateful for that. I truly am grateful. I don't really want to get carried away. I have a little more to say. How do you think I fulfill the role of spiritual speaker? They would have a fit in my home group if they knew that someone had designated me the Sunday morning spiritual speaker. There's one old man that doesn't have a tooth in his head, and he would go haw, haw, haw. They talked to me about the second step of AA. Came to believe. See, it's all power, isn't it? God, I had been in AA a long time before I even knew the word existed. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Have you ever considered who ourselves is? The step says greater than ours. Who is ourselves? I think we need to know who ourselves is before we understand the depth and the meaning of that one particular step. I do believe that the original ourselves was the writer of that step plus the other people with whom he kept company, such as Bill Wilson and 99 other men. It says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It doesn't say one thing. Now, let me tell you something. Man, you can't get much higher in my group than to be a volunteer, washer of cups. And that's big stuff. That's a particular kind of food that when we take of it, we become better people as washing coffee cups in an AA clubhouse. That's big stuff. But that isn't what they're talking about in the second step. It doesn't say anything about going to 7 meetings a week, although that's good stuff. What the step says, that we come to believe that a power greater than me and all of you can restore me to sanity. Now, this does not mean, by any stretch of your imagination, that it's not a very good thing to come to AA, wash coffee cups, come to 7 meetings a week and be the official greeter, and stay in a state called not drinking and be kind of dingy. Now, that's okay. But there's something a little bit beyond it. And that comes as the result of addressing ourselves to a power greater than me and all of you people here today. And then I can be restored to 2 things: sobriety and sanity. Everything about our program relates to power. I have found that I have tapped a previously unknown source of power as a result of coming to some degree of sanity and sobriety in my life. And this has to do with the recognition of the power and possibly wherein it lies. Have you ever seen the look on a little girl, like 3 or 4 years old, face when she first sees a kitten? Or the look on a little boy's face when he's 3 or 4 years old when he first sees a dog? You should have seen the look that came upon my face the first time I really kissed Marceline. You should have seen the look that was about me. The very, very first time that I saw our firstborn. I've seen it in others. I see it in AA clubhouses all across the nation. That's where the power is. You see, my belief is that I do not have an individualized power, a Bob White power that has the capacity to generate anything as soft and tender as his child's smile. I don't think that me, my face, my facial expressions are constructed in such a manner that will allow a look to come over me or be about me when I'm talking to a drunk that says in essence to me, there's something so badly wrong in my life, I do not want to be what I am, and I don't have the power to be different. And do you know I take on a different appearance when I do these things. This power is so amazing that it gathers people like you and me together every day across the nation in meeting halls and in conventions. The third step of Alcoholics Anonymous says, and it talks about turning our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand God. The thing that I needed above all things to know in AA was what my will was. And as a result of good sponsorship and a lot of time in the big book of AA, I discovered that my will was the thing that had got me in all of that trouble. You remember a while back that I mentioned that every problem and every trouble that I had ever experienced was immediately preceded by an expression of self-will. And inevitably, they led to bad trouble. The most apt description of an alcoholic that I have ever read is in the big book of AA. Self-will run riot. And with good sponsorship, attending lots of meetings, it came to me that the thing above all things that I needed to be rid of in this life was my will. And AA gave me a step to come to an understanding of it that I could make this transition. The transition that has to do with my will and giving it to God. And the life that they talk about in the third step is my direction. I need a place to go. I later need a place to be, although this is the day that I express in. It's the only time I've ever had or ever will have to express myself is right now. But I need direction in my life so that I will not ever again get lost. So if I turn my life and my direction over into the care of this power, this is the miracle of the program of AA. I will always be at home. Isn't that nice? I'm not going home. I'm home. I'm not looking for a place to be. I'm there. I'm not urging you to locate someplace else. You're home. You're home, and I'm home, and I do believe it will forever be that way. Later on, quite soon, we're going to hear, as we stand and hold hands, these words. We're going to end the prayer with something like this. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. You know, when I think about kingdom, I think for maybe the very first time I know today where it all is. I think that maybe for the very first time, not just today, but some days past, this has come to me. That if there's a kingdom, then there surely is a king. And I know beyond all knowing that I am His son. And as so, I have inherited. And I am a prince. I really am. I am a prince of His kingdom, my Father's kingdom. And in this prayer, that is my recognition. This is when I certify that He's the king and I am His kid. The kingdom and the power and even the Lord's Prayer that we use to close AA meetings recognizes the fact that never ever again will you and I be in a position caught up in circumstances of life where we find that we do not want to be what we've become and be helpless in the face of it. For thine is the power, and He has given us the use of this power so that we might do certain things. And the key to me has to do with just one word. It's nothing that I do, and I can't make brownie points. I believe with every fiber of my being He loved me just as much at the very worst of my drinking as He does this morning. I don't believe that I had any more to answer for then than I do today. Because you see, I have become a knower, and I might be more answerable today than I was then. I know. And I know that you know. The power and the glory forever. You know what I think the glory is this Sunday morning? I think it's mine, it's my recognition, and your recognition of the source of the power. Do you believe it? I believe it. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I sure do love you people. Thank you.
It's just a small token of our love for you. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here this weekend, and hope all of you have a safe trip home, and we'll be looking forward to seeing each and every one of you and a friend next year. Will you all stand and help me close this meeting with the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this recording and would like to listen to other talks on recovery, please visit our free website at recoveryspeakers.com. We have assembled the largest historical recovery audio library in the world and are adding new talks each day.